Racist cop scares black woman's son, but his mother arrives carrying files that expose his secret abuses. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. It was a typical Tuesday afternoon when 10-year-old Jaden Johnson walked down the sidewalk, his mind lost in thoughts of his after-school game. The sun shone brightly above, casting long shadows as he passed a row of parked cars. Jaden had always felt safe here, in his neighborhood, but today was different. Today, something in the air felt off. As Jaden skipped past the corner, a white police officer, Officer Mark Davis, stepped out from the shadows of a nearby alleyway, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the young boy. "Hey you," Officer Davis barked, his voice sharp, breaking the peaceful quiet of the street. Jaden stopped in his tracks, confusion creeping into his chest. "What are you doing here?" Officer Davis demanded, taking a step forward. Jaden's heart raced, but he remained silent, his small hands clenched at his sides. The officer's presence felt overwhelming, intimidating. Jaden opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say a word, Officer Davis interrupted. "I've seen kids like you before. What are you up to?" The words stung, and Jaden's mind raced. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong, but the officer wasn't listening. He stepped closer, his hand hovering near his radio, as though ready to call for backup at any moment. Jaden tried to take a step back, but the officer blocked his path, narrowing his eyes even further. "You better tell me what you're doing here, or I'll have to take you down to the station for questioning." Jaden's pulse quickened. He had never been in trouble with the law. He just wanted to get home, but the officer wasn't making it easy. The situation was spiraling out of control, and Jaden felt a wave of fear wash over him. He was about to speak up to tell Officer Davis he hadn't done anything wrong, when suddenly, from the corner of the street, a black SUV pulled up. The car door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was tall, poised, and moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had been in control of her surroundings for years. Tiffany Johnson, Jaden's mother, stepped onto the scene. Her sharp eyes immediately locked onto Officer Davis, and without saying a word, she walked toward him. Tiffany had been a special agent with the FBI for over 15 years. She had seen injustice firsthand, and her instincts told her something was off about this situation. Her eyes flicked to Jaden's worried face, then back to the officer, who was still blocking his path. Officer Davis, not realizing who she was, sneered, "Is this your son? Maybe you should teach him some respect for authority." Tiffany's expression remained calm, but there was a fire burning behind her gaze. She reached in her bag and pulled out a thick file, the weight of it seeming to carry a history of secrets that could bring down the entire system if exposed. She stepped forward and handed the file to Officer Davis. His eyes scanned the contents of the first page, his expression shifting from smugness to confusion. His posture faltered as he realized who he was dealing with. Tiffany Johnson wasn't just another mother. She was an FBI agent, and those files contained evidence that would change everything. Officer Davis's face paled as he read further, and the sound of his breath caught in his throat. The moment was thick with tension, and everyone around could feel it. Tiffany stood tall, her voice firm but calm as she addressed him. "You've made a grave mistake today, Officer Davis, and you'll answer for it." The atmosphere shifted in an instant. The people around them began to murmur, and Officer Davis, realizing the gravity of his actions, was no longer in control of the situation. Tiffany's power had taken over, and the truth was about to come to light. The story that had started with an unjust confrontation was now heading toward a climax no one saw coming. Tiffany Johnson wasn't just here to defend her son. She was here to expose the officer's hidden abuses and bring justice to the surface, no matter the cost. Karma had arrived, and Officer Davis was about to learn a hard lesson about the consequences of his actions. The air around them felt heavy with the weight of the moment. Officer Davis stood frozen, the file still in his hands, his mouth dry as he looked up at Tiffany. The once arrogant posture he had held when confronting Jaden was gone, replaced by a mix of confusion and fear. Tiffany remained calm, her gaze unwavering. She knew exactly what the file contained: proof of the officer's corruption, the records of his past abuses, and the way he had used his badge to terrorize the very people he was supposed to protect. She wasn't just standing there for herself. She was standing for every victim of injustice who had never had a voice. The crowd around them began to murmur, whispers spreading like wildfire. They were watching history unfold, the moment when power was shifted, when a corrupt system was brought to light. Tiffany took a slow step forward, her heels clicking against the pavement. "Officer Davis," she began, her voice firm but composed, "you've been hiding behind your badge for far too long. But not anymore. This file will change everything." Officer Davis opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was too stunned, too shaken by the reality of the situation. Tiffany could feel the shift in the atmosphere, the shift in power. For years, she had fought to uncover the truth, to expose corruption in law enforcement. But this moment, standing here in front of this officer, felt like the culmination of all that hard work. She had never imagined that it would come down to this, a single moment of confrontation that would turn everything upside down. Tiffany's mind raced with the implications of what she had just revealed. The file was full of evidence, records of bribery, reports of misconduct, and most damning of all, documented accounts of racial profiling and violence. It wasn't just about Officer Davis. It was about a broken system that allowed people like him to continue their reign of terror unchecked. She turned to Jaden, who had been standing silently by her side, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and awe. Tiffany gave him a reassuring smile, the one she always gave him when things got tough. "It's going to be okay," she said softly. But even as she spoke those words, she knew that the fight wasn't over yet. Tiffany had just exposed a fraction of the truth, but the road ahead would be long and filled with challenges. Officer Davis was only the tip of the iceberg, and Tiffany would not stop until the entire corrupt network was brought down. Officer Davis, still holding the file, looked around at the growing crowd of witnesses. He could feel the weight of their eyes on him. It was clear that his days of hiding in the shadows were over. He had underestimated Tiffany, thinking she was just another mother, just another victim. But now, he saw her for what she truly was, a force to be reckoned with. Tiffany stepped closer, her voice low but clear. "You've made a mistake, officer. And now, you'll have to face the consequences." She turned to the crowd, her eyes sweeping across them. "This is what happens when you stand up to injustice. This is what happens when you fight back." Tiffany's words echoed through the street, and for the first time in a long time, the people in the crowd felt a sense of hope. The system might have failed them in the past, but today they had witnessed something different. Today, they had seen the beginning of real change. As Tiffany and Jaden walked away, Officer Davis remained standing there, the file still clutched tightly in his hands. He knew his life was about to change, and no matter how hard he tried to fight it, the truth had already been set in motion. As Tiffany and Jaden walked away from the scene, the weight of the moment slowly began to settle in. Tiffany's stride was steady, each step full of purpose, but inside, her mind raced. She had just exposed a single piece of a much larger puzzle, and though she knew this victory was significant, she couldn't afford to relax. The fight was far from over. She glanced down at Jaden, who was still trying to process everything that had just happened. His eyes were wide, a mix of fear and awe on his face, but also a spark of something else, pride. Tiffany smiled at him, her heart swelling with love and a quiet sense of relief. "You did great, Jaden," she said softly, her voice full of warmth. "You stayed calm, and that was important. We got this." Jaden nodded, still processing the shock of the day. He had never seen his mother like this before, so powerful, so in control. He had always known she was strong, but seeing her take down an officer like that, a man who had tried to intimidate him, was something else entirely. Tiffany's thoughts drifted to the file in her bag, the one that had been the key to exposing Officer Davis's secret. That file held more than just evidence of Davis's wrongdoing. It contained a trail that led to an entire network of corruption within the police force. Tiffany knew she had just scratched the surface, but even so, the revelations in that file were enough to start unraveling the system. It wasn't just about one corrupt officer. It was about an entire system that had allowed men like Davis to flourish, unchecked and untouchable. She had spent years working undercover, gathering evidence, and connecting the dots, and now she was closer than ever to bringing it all to light. Tiffany's phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her out of thoughts. She pulled it out and glanced at the screen. It was a message from her colleague, Agent Marcus Williams. Asterisk, the team is ready. We got your back. It's time. Asterisk, Tiffany's heart skipped a beat. She had known this day would come, but now that it was here, there was no turning back. She typed a quick reply. Asterisk, I'll be there soon. Asterisk, she turned to Jaden, who was looking up at her expectantly. We've got work to do, Jaden. But first, let's get you home. You've had enough excitement for one day. They made their way to the car, the streets of the city bustling around them, but Tiffany's mind was elsewhere. As they drove, she thought about the challenges that lay ahead. She had exposed Davis, but he was just one piece of the puzzle. The road ahead would be filled with obstacles, with people who would do anything to protect their power. But Tiffany had come this far, and she wasn't about to stop now. She glanced at Jaden, who had fallen silent beside her. You're going to be okay, she said, her voice reassuring. Jaden nodded, his gaze fixed out the window. He knew that his mother was doing something important, something that could change everything. But he also knew that the journey wasn't over. As they pulled into their driveway, Tiffany's phone buzzed again. It was Marcus once more. Asterisk, the files you brought in, they're already being processed. The truth is going to break wide open. Asterisk, Tiffany read the message, feeling a surge of adrenaline. This was it. The beginning of the end for the corrupt system that had been allowed to thrive for so long. She knew it wouldn't be easy, and the stakes were higher than ever. But she was ready. She had to be. The battle was just beginning, and Tiffany was more determined than ever to see it through, no matter what it took. In the following days, the weight of what Tiffany had started began to sink in. The files she had revealed were already making waves within the police department, and whispers of the corruption within the ranks were beginning to surface. It was only a matter of time before the storm grew stronger. Tiffany was at her desk, carefully reviewing more evidence, when her phone buzzed. It was Marcus again. Asterisk, we have confirmation. Davis has been pulled in for questioning. They're starting to connect the dots. Asterisk, Tiffany took a deep breath. This was it, the beginning of the unraveling. But she knew that exposing one officer wasn't going to be enough. There were still others who would try to cover their tracks, people who had far more power and influence than Officer Davis ever had. Tiffany looked over at Jaden, who was sitting quietly at the kitchen table, his face buried in a book, trying to block out the chaos around him. She knew he didn't fully understand the gravity of the situation, but he could feel it. The tension in their home had shifted since that day. Tiffany had always kept her work separate from her family life, but now the lines between them were blurring. She could see it in Jaden's eyes, the concern, the confusion, and the unspoken questions. Tiffany knew she couldn't keep him in the dark for much longer. As she walked over to him, she hesitated for a moment. She didn't want to add more stress to his already heavy heart, but she also knew that Jaden deserved to understand. Hey, bud, she said softly, sitting down next to him. He looked up from his book, his eyes still wide with curiosity. Can we talk for a second? Jaden nodded, setting the book aside. Tiffany took a deep breath before continuing. You know how I've been. Working hard on something for a long time, right? Jaden's eyes flickered with recognition. He had heard her mention it before, but he never really understood what it was. Yeah, he said quietly. Well, the thing I've been working on has to do with making sure people who are supposed to protect others aren't doing bad things. And some of the people I've been looking into, some of the officers, have been doing things that hurt a lot of people. Jaden's face twisted in confusion. But why? He asked. Why would they do that? Tiffany paused, trying to find the right words. Sometimes, when people are in power, they start thinking they can do whatever they want. They forget what's right and wrong. and they hurt others to stay in control. But that's not okay, and I'm going to do everything I can to stop it. Jaden sat up a little straighter, his face serious now. So, is that why that cop was so mean to me? He asked. Tiffany nodded, her heart breaking a little at the memory of Jaden's scared expression that day. Yes, but I want you to know that we're going to make sure he doesn't hurt anyone else. People like him can't get away with it. We're going to make sure the truth comes out. Jaden seemed to understand, though the weight of her words lingered in the air. Tiffany gave him a reassuring smile and ruffled his hair. You're strong, Jaden. I want you to remember that. Meanwhile, Tiffany's phone buzzed again, this time a message from her boss. Asterisk, we have the go-ahead. We're going to move forward with a full investigation into the department. Are you ready? Asterisk, Tiffany felt a surge of determination. She wasn't about to back down now. She had to keep going, not just for her, but for Jaden, for the people who had been hurt, and for the truth that needed to be exposed. As the investigation into the corrupt officers continued to unfold, Tiffany was preparing herself for what would be the hardest part of all. Taking down the system meant going up against some of the most powerful people in the city. But Tiffany wasn't afraid. She had the truth on her side, and she would not rest until justice was served. The fight was just beginning, but Tiffany knew that she had already made a difference. And she wasn't going to stop until the entire system was held accountable. The following week, Tiffany found herself sitting in a small conference room, surrounded by her colleagues from the FBI. The atmosphere was tense, as the full scope of their investigation was finally being revealed. Tiffany's mind kept going back to that moment when she had confronted Officer Davis, the file in her hands, and the realization that everything she had worked for had led to this. The files she had exposed were just the beginning. The evidence of corruption within the police department was vast, and the deeper they dug, the more they uncovered. But now, as the investigation went into full swing, Tiffany knew the risks had escalated. She had already seen how powerful people could manipulate the system. The men and women behind the badges were just one part of the equation. Those at the top, the ones who profited from the corruption, were still out there. Tiffany sat upright, focusing on the report in front of her. Agent Marcus Williams, who had been her partner for years, cleared his throat and looked over at her. Tiffany, we're moving forward with the next phase. The higher-ups are involved now. We have to be prepared. Tiffany nodded, her gaze never wavering. I know, but we can't back down. We've already exposed too much. The room fell silent for a moment as the team absorbed the gravity of Tiffany's words. The plan was simple. Continue gathering evidence, infiltrate the ranks, and expose those who were hiding behind their badges. But Tiffany knew the deeper they went, the more dangerous it would become. As they continued to strategize, Tiffany's thoughts drifted back to Jaden. She had promised him that everything would be okay, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this fight was going to take more from them than she had anticipated. The world she had always protected him from was now right in front of him, and she knew he was beginning to understand the true cost of justice. That evening, Tiffany arrived home later than usual, her body tired from the long hours at the office. She walked through the door, and Jaden immediately looked up from the couch. Hey, Mom, he said, his voice tinged with concern. Are you okay? Tiffany gave him a tired but reassuring smile. I'm fine, Jaden. Just a long day at work. She walked over to him, her heart heavy. She had never wanted him to carry the weight of her job, but she knew it was inevitable. I need to talk to you, Tiffany said, her voice soft but serious. Jaden set his game controller down and turned to face her, his expression full of curiosity. What's going on? Tiffany sat next to him on the couch, taking a deep breath before speaking. Jaden, I know I've been busy, and I know you've seen things happen that you don't understand. But I want you to know something. She paused, gathering her thoughts. What I'm doing, what I've been working on, is important. It's not just about me. It's about making sure that people who are supposed to protect others actually do that. It's about making sure no one else gets hurt. Jaden looked at her for a long moment, processing her words. Finally, he nodded slowly. I get it, Mom. I just don't want anything bad to happen to you. Tiffany's heart clenched at his words. She had always tried to protect him, to keep him away from the dangers of her world. But now, she couldn't shield him from the truth. She pulled him into a tight hug, holding him close. "I'm doing everything I can to make sure nothing happens to us. But I need you to be strong, Jaden. We're in this together, okay?" Jaden nodded against her shoulder, the weight of the world on both of their shoulders. As Tiffany held him, she couldn't help but wonder how much longer she could keep up this facade. The investigation was growing, and soon there would be no turning back. But as long as she had Jaden by her side, she would continue the fight. Tiffany knew the path ahead was uncertain, but she was more determined than ever to see it through. The stakes had never been higher, and the pressure was mounting. But Tiffany wasn't going to stop. Not now, not ever. The investigation was progressing quickly now, and Tiffany could feel the pressure mounting with each passing day. The more evidence they uncovered, the more she realized just how deeply the corruption ran within the police department. It was no longer just about Officer Davis. It was about a whole network of officers and city officials who had turned a blind eye to the suffering of the very people they were supposed to protect. Tiffany sat in her office, reviewing yet another set of documents that had been leaked to her team. The files were filled with disturbing details, evidence of stolen property, abuse of power, and systematic cover-ups that had lasted for years. But what struck her the most was the pattern of racial discrimination that ran through it all. Tiffany clenched her jaw as she read through the reports. She had always known that the system was flawed, but seeing it laid out in black and white, knowing that so many had been affected by these actions, made her resolve even stronger. The fight for justice wasn't just for her. It was for every person who had been wronged by those in power. She glanced over at her phone. It buzzed with a new message from Marcus. Asterisk, the DEA is ready to move forward with the case. They need more time, but we're close. Keep pushing. Asterisk, Tiffany exhaled slowly. It was both good news and bad. The closer they got to the truth, the more resistance they would face. She knew that the higher-ups involved in the corruption would stop at nothing to protect themselves. They had money, power, and connections. But Tiffany had something they didn't, the truth. She stood up, walking to the window and looking out at the city skyline. The world was still turning outside. People were still going about their lives, unaware of the storm that was brewing behind the scenes. Tiffany couldn't help but think of Jaden. How much longer could she protect him from all of this? He was so young, and yet he was already feeling the weight of the injustice around him. Tiffany had tried to shield him from the harsh realities of her work, but she knew that it was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down. The phone buzzed again, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a call from her supervisor. She answered immediately. "Tiffany, we need you in the field. The situation has escalated." Her stomach dropped. She could hear the urgency in her boss's voice. "What's going on?" she asked. "We've received a tip that one of the officers we're investigating is planning to destroy evidence. We need you to get in there and intercept it before it's too late." Tiffany's mind raced. This was the break they needed. She couldn't waste any time. "I'm on my way," she said, hanging up the phone. She quickly grabbed her coat and headed for the door. As she drove to the location, her thoughts were consumed with the consequences of what was about to unfold. If they were able to stop this officer from destroying the evidence, it would be a huge step forward in their investigation. But if they failed, everything they had worked for could come crashing down. Tiffany pulled into the parking lot of the warehouse where the tip had led them. The area was eerily quiet, the only sounds coming from the distant hum of city traffic. She parked her car and stepped out, her eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. She didn't know what she was walking into, but she was ready. Tiffany moved quickly, making her way toward the entrance of the building. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, her senses heightened. She was getting closer to the truth, and nothing was going to stop her now. As she reached the door, she took a deep breath and pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Tiffany's eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign of the officer. And then she saw him. He was standing by a table, frantically trying to burn documents. Tiffany's pulse quickened. This was it. She had to act fast. Without hesitation, she rushed forward, her voice cutting through the air. "Stop! Put the papers down!" The officer froze, his eyes wide with fear. For a moment, Neither of them moved. Tiffany could see the panic in his eyes as he realized that his time was up. The officer took a step back, his hands shaking. "You don't know what you're doing," he said, his voice trembling. Tiffany took another step forward, her eyes locked on his. "I know exactly what I'm doing," she said, her voice steady. "And I'm going to make sure you answer for everything." The officer's shoulders slumped in defeat. He knew it was over. Tiffany reached for the papers on the table, holding them up as evidence. "You're not getting away with this," she said, her words firm and resolute. The officer didn't respond. He simply stood there, defeated, knowing that the truth was finally coming to light. The moment Tiffany had been working towards for so long had arrived. She held the documents in her hand, her pulse steady but her mind racing. The officer, who had been caught in the act of destroying evidence, was now fully aware of the inevitable consequence. The truth was no longer something that could be buried under layers of corruption. Tiffany's phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Marcus. Asterisk, we've got the backup on the way. The investigation is about to hit the public eye. Asterisk, Tiffany nodded, her resolve strengthening. The wheels of justice were in motion, and she was at the center of it all. But this wasn't over yet. She needed to ensure that the information didn't just stay within the walls of the department. It had to reach the right people, those who could make a real difference. As she walked out of the warehouse with the officer in tow, she could feel the weight of the documents in her hands, a weight that had the potential to change everything. The officer, who had been a part of the corrupt system for so long, was now completely defeated. Tiffany could see the fear in his eyes, but there was also a sense of resignation. He knew the game was up. He had made his choices, and now he would pay the price. Tiffany got in her car, the officer handcuffed and sitting in the back seat. The road ahead was quiet, but Tiffany's thoughts were anything but calm. She could hear the noise of the city around her, but in her mind, everything was focused on the next steps. The tip-off, the burning papers, the officer's defeat, all of it was a part of a larger plan to take down the corrupt network that had been operating under the guise of justice. Tiffany knew she couldn't stop now. She had come too far, and the stakes had never been higher. She drove to the precinct, her hands steady on the wheel. As she parked, Marcus was already waiting outside, his expression unreadable. He had been by her side through this entire journey, and Tiffany could see the relief in his eyes as he approached. "You did it," Marcus said quietly, his voice filled with admiration. Tiffany simply nodded, not needing to say anything. She had known this day would come, but seeing it unfold felt different. It wasn't just about catching one officer. It was about taking down an entire system of corruption. They walked into the precinct, and Tiffany immediately handed over the documents to the lead investigator. The team had already been alerted, and the investigation would be in full swing by the morning. As the officer was processed and led into the holding cell, Tiffany couldn't help but think of Jaden. She had promised him that everything would be okay, but the weight of the world was still on her shoulders. The fight wasn't over, and there would be more challenges ahead. But she had made a promise, not just to Jaden, but to everyone who had been wronged by the system. She wouldn't stop until justice was served. Later that night, Tiffany sat at the kitchen table, her eyes tired but determined. Jaden had already gone to bed, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to come. Her phone buzzed once more. This time it was a news alert. Asterisk, breaking. Major corruption scandal within the police department. Officer arrested for destruction of evidence. Others implicated. Asterisk, Tiffany smiled, the smallest hint of satisfaction. The world was finally starting to see the truth. She knew this was just the beginning. The path ahead would be long, and there would be many obstacles. But for the first time in a long while, Tiffany felt like she was on the right side of history. She had made a difference, and that was something no one could take away from her. She stood up from the table, her determination unwavering. No matter how hard the road ahead might be, she was ready. She was ready to see it through to the end, no matter the cost. The days that followed were filled with a sense of urgency. Tiffany had expected the investigation to take time, but the speed with which the evidence was being processed and the revelations began to unfold was overwhelming. News outlets were starting to catch on to the corruption within the police department, and public interest was growing rapidly. Tiffany knew that the higher-ups would try to cover their tracks, but the truth had a way of slipping through cracks no matter how much they tried to conceal it. She sat in her office one afternoon, looking over the latest report. The officer who had been caught destroying evidence, along with several others, had been arrested. The press was relentless, and people were finally starting to demand accountability. Tiffany could feel the tension mounting. The walls that had kept corruption hidden for so long were beginning to crumble, but the battle wasn't over. She had to remain focused. Tiffany's phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a text from Marcus. Asterisk, the DA is pushing for charges, but they need more. We can't afford to stop now. Asterisk, Tiffany exhaled slowly. It was good news, but it also meant they were getting closer to the heart of the problem. The deeper they went, the more dangerous it would become. She grabbed her coat and headed for the door. It was time for another meeting, this one with a key figure in the investigation, a whistleblower from within the department who had come forward with critical information. As Tiffany arrived at the meeting spot, a small, discreet cafe on the outskirts of the city, her mind raced with what lay ahead. She couldn't afford to let her guard down, not now. The whistleblower, a former officer named Stephen, had been reluctant at first, but after weeks of back and forth, he had agreed to meet. Tiffany knew his testimony could be the final piece of the puzzle that would bring down the entire network of corrupt officers. As she entered the cafe, she scanned the room quickly, spotting Stephen at a corner table, looking around nervously. Tiffany walked over and sat down across from him. "Stephen," she said softly, "thanks for meeting with me." He nodded, his eyes darting nervously around the room. "I didn't think it would go this far," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted to get involved in something like this. But when I saw what was happening, I couldn't stay silent anymore." Tiffany leaned forward, listening closely. She had heard whispers of what Stephen knew, but this was the first time he was speaking out in public. "I've been working in this department for over 15 years, Stephen continued, his voice shaking. "And what I've seen is worse than anything I could have imagined. Officers covering for each other. Evidence getting destroyed. It's been going on for years, but no one has dared to speak up. Until now." Tiffany's heart raced as she took in his words. This was what she had been waiting for. The confirmation of everything they had suspected. But there was more to be done. "Stephen," she said, her voice steady, "we need your full cooperation. What you know can change everything. You're the key to ending this." He hesitated, looking around the cafe again, as though checking for anyone who might be listening. "I'm ready," he said finally, a look of determination in his eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes to make sure this doesn't keep happening." Tiffany gave him a small, reassuring smile. "We're going to make sure it ends. For good." As they continued their conversation, Tiffany's mind raced ahead to what would come next. The information Stephen had just given them was invaluable, but it also meant that they were nearing the end of the investigation. The closer they got to the truth, the more dangerous it would become. Tiffany knew that once they went public with what they had uncovered, there would be no turning back. But she also knew that the truth was worth any risk. She had come this far, and now there was no going back. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Tiffany was not going to stop until every last piece of the corrupt system was exposed. It was time to take the fight to the next level. As Tiffany walked into the conference room the following morning, the weight of the moment hit her all over again. The investigation had been progressing quickly, and now they were preparing to go public with the findings. The room was filled with the quiet hum of activity as the team gathered around the table. Tiffany could feel the eyes of her colleagues on her, but she kept her focus sharp. The evidence had been gathered, the pieces were coming together, and the truth was about to be exposed. Tiffany stood at the head of the table, her voice steady as she addressed the room. "We've reached a critical point," she said, looking around at the team. "This isn't just about the officers we've already identified. This is about dismantling an entire system that has allowed corruption to thrive for far too long. We can't let this slip away now." Marcus, who had been by her side from the beginning, nodded in agreement. He was ready, but Tiffany could see the tension in his eyes. They both knew that this was the part where things could go wrong. "We've got all the evidence we need," Marcus said, his voice low but resolute. "We've got the documents, the testimonies, the whistleblower's statement. It's time to take this to the press." Tiffany nodded. The press conference was set for the following day, and it was their last chance to ensure that the public saw the full extent of the corruption within the department. There was no turning back. As Tiffany left the meeting, her mind raced. She thought about Jaden, about how much he had grown over the past few months. He had witnessed more than a child should have to, but he had been strong through it all. Tiffany had promised him that she would see this through, no matter the cost, and now she was closer than ever to making good on that promise. That night, she sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her as she reviewed the final report. Her eyes skimmed over the details, the names, the timeline of events that had led to this point. She knew that this was only the beginning. The press would pick up the story, the public would demand accountability, but the real fight was just starting. Tiffany had already seen the lengths to which the powerful would go to protect themselves. She had exposed the corruption within the department, but there were others who would try to bury it. Tiffany couldn't afford to be complacent now. She had to be prepared for whatever came next. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Marcus. Asterisk, the press is ready. It's time. Asterisk. Tiffany stood up, taking a deep breath. She looked out the window at the quiet street below. She had come so far, but she knew the hardest part was still ahead of her. The battle for justice wasn't over, but she was ready. She had to be. As she walked to the door, she took one last look at the house. It was calm now, but soon the world would know the truth. Tiffany stepped outside, the weight of the moment settling in. She had made it this far, and nothing was going to stop her now. The world was about to change, and Tiffany was at the center of it all. As she arrived at the press conference, she could feel the eyes of the reporters on her. Cameras flashed as she stepped up to the podium, the silence in the room deafening. Tiffany took a deep breath and began to speak. Today, we take the first step toward justice. The system that was supposed to protect us has failed us for too long. But the truth has a way of coming to light, no matter how hard people try to hide it. We've uncovered a network of corruption within the police department, and today we begin the process of holding those responsible accountable. The room was silent for a moment before the questions began to pour in. Tiffany answered each one with precision, her voice unwavering. She knew that this was the moment she had been working towards. The truth was out, and there was no going back. As the press conference came to a close, Tiffany stepped away from the podium, feeling the weight of the world lift just a little. The fight wasn't over, but today they had taken the first step. She walked out of the room with her head held high, knowing that the truth had been heard. No matter what came next, Tiffany had done what she set out to do. She had brought the truth to light, and now there was no turning back.